Hello, everybody. It's so nice to see a few people with their cameras on. It's nice to see your faces. Welcome to, I believe this is our third or fourth online parent ed event of the year. And we're super fortunate to welcome our friend and colleague, Melanie Noble, tonight, who's going to talk to us about the joys and challenges of all things ADHD. So we have a few items of business to take care of first. So one thing is, as I mentioned, we are recording tonight. Please feel free to leave your camera on, turn your camera off, totally whatever is most comfortable for you. If you've got questions, we'll let Melanie do her presentation and conversation. And then if you'd like to throw questions into the chat, we'll do question and answer for as long as we can near the end. We probably will not go, we're not going to go longer than an hour. So we're going to be tight and concise, but feel free to throw those questions in the chat because that's also a way that I can sort of help keep it moving there at the end. Okay, sorry, my dog is pushing me around here. We're going to start this evening with our land acknowledgement. So Mildenhall Montessori schools are in Toronto. I can never pronounce it. Tkaronto, is the Mohawk word for where there are trees standing in the water. This area falls within the territory of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee peoples. Our school is grateful and privileged to be able to live and work on this land. Tattle Creek, High Park Gardens, and the Mildenhall School respect the Dish with One Spoon covenant to this land. The Dish with One Spoon covenant is a peace agreement made between Indigenous nations before the Europeans arrived. It means that we should take only what we need, leave enough for others, and care diligently for the earth. We pledge to be aware and knowledgeable of the history and current day experiences of Indigenous people. We also pledge to take action to repair the generations of harm done to the Indigenous people who are our neighbors, friends, and members of our global community. So without further, please welcome Melanie Noble.
Hi, everyone. It's so great to see you. Thanks for joining me on this Thursday evening. Anne or Rebecca, I think you guys need to make me host or co-host again so I can share my screen and we can get started. So tonight we're going to be talking about the joys and the challenges of ADHD, what that can be like for parents, parenting children with ADHD. And of course, given that we have, roughly about an hour, this is absolutely the Coles Notes version. So bear that in mind. And I'm really happy to answer questions at the end if you have any. So tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about neurodiversity, covering some facts, what the criteria is for diagnosis. We're going to look a little bit at what ADHD looks like in girls. It wouldn't be the joys and challenges of ADHD if we didn't also talk about the gifts of ADHD. I'm briefly going to cover presentation of ADHD by age. We're really going to talk a lot about executive function, and we'll talk a bit about family scaffolding, what Montessori and ADHD, kind of what it's like in the Montessori environment, and cover some general strategies. So for some of you, the term neurodiversity might be new, or you might be a bit unfamiliar with it. And for some of you, you might be very familiar with it. It's really a mindset shift that differences such as autism and ADHD and dyslexia are just a normal variation of the human genome. So they are not disabilities or abnormalities. They're just a difference, a brain difference, and we would recognize them the same way that we would recognize differences in ethnicity or sexual orientation or gender. The term was first coined by Judy Singer, who is herself neurodiverse, in 1998. So the difference between neurodiversity and neurodivergent. Neurodiversity is the biological fact that people experience and interact in the world in many different ways, and that there is no right or correct way to think, learn, and behave. So really, neurodiversity thinks in terms of differences and not deficits, whereas neurodivergent refers to having a brain that is functioning that in a way that is divergent from the dominant societal standards of normal. Okay, so there's lots of things that we need to sort of unpack about the facts of ADHD, because we hear about ADHD a lot. There are memes and people kind of throw it out there a lot, like, oh, I'm having an ADHD moment. There's also, that means that a lot of people are sort of concerned that we're hearing more about ADHD now than we ever used to before. And so sometimes people question, like, why is there so much ADHD now? And the reason that we hear about it and we know about it more is simply because we do know more about the brain and we do recognize these differences. And so people are getting the diagnosis and they're able to talk about it. So there's been a lot of destigmatization, not as much as there should be, but there has been some. So we are hearing about it more. It is the most common neurobiological condition known to humankind. In 2015, the CDC estimated that between 9 and 11% of the population has ADHD. ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder. So that means it affects the brain and it's genetic. Okay. It isn't due to bad parenting. It isn't due to, environmental factors. Isn't due to, having juice at an early age or any of those kinds of things. It is a neurodevelopmental disorder. And it impacts, for some children, it can really impact their learning. It is also a lifelong condition. So it is something that you don't outgrow. It's not something that gets cured, right? You have it for life, but the symptoms will change over time. So sometimes the symptoms lessen a little bit went into adulthood, but it's still a lifelong condition. About 80% of adolescents and 60% of adults still feel that they are impaired by the symptoms of their ADHD. ADHD impacts all ethnicities and socioeconomic statuses. It does not discriminate. Really, medical science, like all medical science, acknowledges that ADHD exists. And World Health Organizations all recognize it as they call it a disorder. Sometimes ADHD does affect behavior. And that's why we tend to notice it, is because of the behavior, but it isn't a behavior disorder. Girls tend to have fewer symptoms, particularly of hyperactivity, and they tend to fly under the radar. We'll touch base more on that a little bit later. Generally speaking, treatment for ADHD should be multimodal. So at some point in an ADHDer's life, they will require medication. That's, it's maybe not the first thing that you go to. But generally speaking, at some point, someone is in their life, they're going to need it. They may not need it forever. And also, some therapies, coaching, and things like that. A big thing to remember is that the brain of a person with ADHD is developing on average about 3 years later than a neurotypical brain. And that's particularly in the prefrontal cortex, where the executive functions live. So the diagnostic criteria, which uses the DSM, the 5th edition currently, defines ADHD as a persistent pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity, impulsivity that's interfering with functioning or development. The symptoms must be present in 2 or more settings. So you need to be seeing them at home and at school, at home and at extracurriculars, those kinds of things. It can't just be something that you see in one situation. And these symptoms are negatively impacting the social, academic, or occupational functioning of the person. The symptoms have to have been present before the age of 12. There are 3 types of ADHD. There's the predominantly inattentive, there's the hyperactive impulsive, and the most common is the combined type. So the average age for ADHD diagnosis is about 8 for mild, 7 for what they consider moderate, and 5 for severe. More things that are required for the diagnosis. The symptoms have to have been persistent for more than 6 months, and that they're more frequent and severe than you would see in normal development. The onset of symptoms started prior to the age of 12. This person is experiencing significant impairments in at least 2 of those settings. It can't be explained by any other medical or mental disorder. A change from the previous criteria is that hyperactivity is not required for a diagnosis. So that's a change since the early 2000s. The ADHD symptoms need to be consistent, persistent, pervasive, and impairing. So that predominantly inattentive type, the child has to present with 6 or more of the following symptoms. So inattention to details, making careless mistakes, difficulty keeping their attention, they appear not to be listening, they start a task but can't finish it, they've got challenges staying organized, they are avoiding tasks that are going to require a lot of attention, they're constantly losing things, they're easily distracted, and they're forgetful. Okay, so if a child has 6 or more of those, then they might be diagnosed with the predominantly inattentive type. These are the daydreamers, right? The ADHD hyperactive impulsive type, I always like to think of this as the Kevin from Home Alone type, right? It's the one we're most familiar with, right? These are impulsive kids. They're blurting out answers before the question's even been finished. They can't wait their turn. They're interrupting others. They're constantly fidgeting. They can't stay in their seat. They're climbing and running, bouncing off the walls. Even when you're trying to do like a quiet leisure activity, they can't do it quietly. They're constantly, talking and, just fidgeting all the time. They're constantly on the go. They're always doing things without thinking of the consequences, and they really struggle with problem solving. So again, 6 of those would be required for a hyperactive impulsive type diagnosis. So the most common is a combined type. And so those folks have 6 or more symptoms from each of those lists, right? So with a total of 12 symptoms. Now, because I come with a neurodiversity mindset, I really believe that, nature just makes differences, and it's society that makes handicaps. So it's really up to us, as educators and as parents, to try and make the world for our kiddos accepting of differences and make it less of a hurdle. So some of the ways that ADHD might present in girls, because for the longest time, it was thought that ADHD was really, a boy's disorder. It was something that presented in boys. And it's only now, in recent years that science is really coming to acknowledge that girls were really missed. Unfortunately, there has not been an update yet to the DSM. So the diagnostic criteria has not been changed to reflect how it shows up in girls. Hopefully that change is coming. Girls tend to have the inattentive subtype or present more with that, right? They are the daydreamers. They also get really easily discouraged, right? They tend to be people pleasing, right? That's kind of how we're raised as girls, is to be, pleasing. And so they become really discouraged. They're really risk averse. Some can be quite shy, whereas others are incredibly talkative. They might present as being really silly or kind of ditzy. They can have challenges maintaining friendships. So sometimes that diagnosis might come a little later in their adolescence, when they're really struggling with those sorts of friendships. They get really overwhelmed. They can be even anxious and depressed and very critical of themselves. So girls are frequently undiagnosed, or they receive diagnosis later in life. What's very common is that a child gets a diagnosis, and while the child is going through the diagnostic process, because we know it's a genetic trait, the parents will then be asked, does any of this sort of sound familiar? And then the mother will end up going through the diagnostic process herself and realize only as an adult that, the challenges that she faced were due to having ADHD that went undiagnosed. So because girls are, underdiagnosed or receiving their diagnosis later in life, they often present and get a dual diagnosis of anxiety and or depression, right? Because they're internalizing all of their challenges. They seem to be at higher risk of having a conduct disorder or oppositional defiant disorder diagnosis prior to their ADHD diagnosis. Understandably, they have really low self-esteem as a result of being undiagnosed. And again, this is really, for untreated or underdiagnosed, they're at higher risk of self-harm, substance abuse, and suicide attempts. They're also at higher risk for developing eating disorders. So all that to say that it's really critical that we look at our girls and recognize what some of the symptoms may be in the girls in our families. That being said, the diagnostic criteria is all about the deficits. And I really believe in differences and not deficits. So there were gifts of ADHD as well, right? These are novelty-seeking people. They are always seeking something new and interesting, and that's what their brain is, and their nervous system is fired up about. They're living fully in the moment, right? They're energetic. They are out of the box thinkers. We need these people in our lives. We need them in our societies. Some of those, quiet ones, they're observing what's often overlooked. As they're sitting there seemingly, daydreaming, they might actually be doing these incredible observations of the environment around them. They are creative. They're also really intuitive, right? They tend to be quite sensitive to their emotions themselves. And as a result, it makes them really intuitive about others. Hey, when you get this ADHDer focused on a task that they are interested in, they are 150% engaged in that task, right? Like the fire alarms can be going off and they are not going to care or notice because they are fully committed to this task that they're engaged in. They're passionate. They're passionate about the things that interest them. They also have a really unique view of the world. I love chatting with people who share their insights about what their take is on things. And I'm like, wow, like I never would have thought of it that way. That is such a unique and cool perspective. They can be really exuberant, emotionally expressive, spontaneous. And these people are great in a crisis, right? So one of the things that ADHD does is it impacts the dopamine receptors in the brain. In that people with ADHD They tend not to be receiving dopamine in the same way that a neurotypical brain does. But it means that in a crisis, when their dopamine levels go up and our dopamine levels have gone up. So in a neurotypical brain, in a crisis, I'm now useless, right? Because my brain is now in fight or flight and I can't access, the frontal lobe. I can't access my reasoning brain. An ADHD brain, they have just hit peak dopamine for them. Their fight or flight has not been executed. So they are great in a crisis. They are able to do all of this multitasking and stay focused. They are the ones you want helping you in a crisis. This is a lovely quote from Angie Chang, who is a person who has ADHD. And she said, it's not a disability. It's just a different ability. And so, the key is for us to not change individuals to conform with the crowd, but to enhance their strengths that may set them apart from the pack. So as an educator, this is really the kind of mentality that I bring with me in the support work that I do with children. So in a 3 to 6 classroom, or, if you are parenting a 3 to 6-year-old, it may present as motor restlessness. They're messy. They're insatiably curious, right? You just can't, they have 1,000,001 questions and you can't, you just can't answer enough of them. They may appear fearless, right? They play vigorously. They may be really demanding, noisy, kind of argumentative. They may be experiencing what seems like excessive temper tantrums. Low levels of compliance. They may answer your questions if you're trying to have a conversation with them. They may answer in a totally non-related topic. They may quit or get frustrated when things go wrong and really struggle with regrouping and starting over again. They may be doing a task that has multi-steps and then forget what comes next. Or they may freeze, right? In that moment where they've forgotten, they kind of don't know what to do. And so they've just frozen. Certainly in the classroom, one of the big red flags for us in a 3 to 6 classroom is a child who by December, who started with us in September, still doesn't know what the daily routine is. So if some of these are jiving for you, if they're kind of ringing some alarm bells for you, it may be worth pursuing. You should know that ADHD generally isn't diagnosed under the age of 4, just because so many of these things can sometimes also be developmentally appropriate, right? However, if you have concerns, it may be worth looking into. In the 6 to 12 age group, they're easily distracted. They've got poor organizational skills. They're making, really kind of careless, silly errors. Their work is often incomplete. These kids may be interrupting constantly, or in a group setting are constantly shouting out the answers. They can't wait their turn. This is when it really starts to show up in a social situation as well, because, the 6 to 12-year-old is just a much more social being. And so their relationships are suffering. They might be sort of the last picked, first picked on, or it might be that their social relationships are starting to fray. They're having a difficult time maintaining friendships. They kind of just seem immature. They're unable or unwilling to do chores at home. Really dysregulated moods. Challenges with time management. Really fearful about making mistakes. And that may even present as learned helplessness. So this is so freaky for me, this new thing. I'm not even going to try it. I'm going to quit before I even try. Because if I can't guarantee that I'm going to do this thing perfectly, I don't even want to start. Forgetfulness, right? They forget facts, spelling, math facts, instructions, belongings. They can have intense concentration on preferred tasks and have a really difficult time transitioning, right? They may have challenges starting a task because it turns out they're overwhelmed with all of the things that maybe need to go into starting that task. They could be, like the wanderers in class or, at the extracurricular activity. They're, meant to be listening to the gymnastics instruction, but they're kind of, wandering or daydreaming. They may be struggling to read some social cues. So they may be, again, experiencing some social unrest with their peers. They're also the kids who like jump into work without, listening or reading any of the instructions. They're right in there. They may be really interested in physical play and also have physical outbursts. Again, some of these things are also typical in the 6 to 12-year-old. So again, if you have some concerns, definitely it can be worth pursuing, but they'll have to pair out what is sort of developmentally appropriate and, what might not be. I know that we probably don't have any adolescent parents, but I thought I would touch on this. And this is particularly true, this presentation of what it can look like in adolescence in an undiagnosed or untreated ADHD. What tends to happen with those really hyperactive kids who maybe had external hyperactivity is that it starts to internalize in adolescence and becomes both an anxiety and also just sort of like a brain hyperactivity. The monkey brain is going all the time. They're disorganized. They have trouble following through, troubles with sleeping, excessive talking, the drug and alcohol experimentation, which shows up on average about 2.5 years earlier than it would in neurotypical teens, risky behaviors, poor peer relationships, poor self-esteem, moodiness, clashes with authority, and then this continuation of impairments into adulthood. And again, I can't stress enough that this is for sort of undiagnosed or untreated ADHD. So one of the primary things about ADHD is that at its core, it affects the executive functions. So what are our executive functions? It's a term that's used to describe these cognitive processes, kind of like the control center of our brain. And we use them all the time in our daily lives. So impulse control, emotional control, flexible thinking, working memory, self-monitoring, planning and prioritizing, task initiation, and organization. So neurotypical executive function begins around the ages of 3.5-ish to 5 years old. But people with ADHD develop their executive function on average about 3 years later, right? So a 6-year-old with ADHD really has the executive function skills of a 3-year-old, which is to say none. So the core executive functions that are impacted by ADHD, the impulse control, right? That's our ability to stop. I'm not going to hit you, even though what you said was really annoying and offensive, right? So the ability to pause between action and reaction. So it's self-control, it's discipline. I'm going to stop binge watching this show because I have this report that I need to write. I'm going to stop paying attention to my friend and focus on the teacher because the teacher is teaching right now, right? All of those are, impulse control. Working memory. So this also can be hindsight, right? So holding information in the mind and manipulating it. So ADHD brains really struggle with learning from past experiences because they store and access past memories differently, right? And our hindsight, our working memory, is really essential in our reasoning. Oh, you know what? The last time I stayed up that late watching TV, I was not able to focus in class. So I should not stay up late on a school night. That kind of reasoning. Foresight, this idea of thinking ahead and then predicting possible outcomes. So that could be, hey, if I take the car without my parents' permission, I could get into a car accident and then I'm going to be in really big trouble. So I probably shouldn't do that, right? Those kinds of things. Self-talk, which is also known as verbal working memory, is also impacted by ADHD. And that's the inner monologue that we all have about ourselves. And particularly in an ADHD brain, that inner monologue tends to be a pretty poor reflection. It's not they're not saying kind things to themselves, unfortunately. Emotional regulation is absolutely impacted by ADHD, and it's the ability to manage emotions and to make them more socially acceptable. So not blurting out like, "Ooh, I don't want to, hug grandma today. She's, got some hairs sticking out of her chin." And then freaking out because they've been told they have to hug grandma anyways. Self-motivation. So people with ADHD are dependent on the environment and its immediate consequences. So if they are asked to do a task that is not interesting to them, they really can't. One of the ways, and so I would not do this necessarily with my educator talk, but because you're all parents, I feel like this could be the audience that I could get away with this. An analogy that I have seen for this self-motivation is that it's a little bit like erectile dysfunction. You can be there and you can really want to do the thing, but you can't make yourself do the thing. So that's where the self-motivation comes in. Right? So the environment and natural consequences don't equal consequences imposed by adults, right? So that's why saying if you don't do your homework, you don't get iPad time is not an effective strategy for kids with ADHD. And it is why people with ADHD tend to be the kind of people who pull all-nighters, because that crunch time of, oh my God, I only have 10 hours before I have to hand this thing in. That's the external motivator. That is the environment that is giving them the motivation required to do the task that is not preferred. If it is a preferred task, ADHDers have no problem concentrating on it. Cognitive flexibility is the last core executive function that's impacted by ADHD. So this is creative problem solving, the ability to shift gears, and to think of something in a new way. So one of the first things that I want to encourage all parents to do is to be your child's advocate. Okay, advocate for your child. You know your child best. So when you are going in to talk to teachers, to talk to admin, I want you to go in as their advocate. This is what my child needs. This is what they're good at, and this is what they're challenged with. And so how can we incorporate more of what they're good at in their day? And how can we help scaffold them in what they find challenging, right? You really want to focus on your child's talents and strengths. At home, creating a structured environment with really clear communication, routines, and consistency is very helpful, right? You can also play games like cooperative games, things like that, to really help with some of those other executive functions, right? To practice, cognitive flexibility and emotional regulation. If your child is doing something that you want them to do, give them feedback immediately, right? Sometimes it's catch them being good. And I don't like to focus on the behaviors of ADHD because too often that's what the focus is. But whatever it is they're doing, like, hey, buddy, wow, you were so focused on that activity. Do you know that you did that for 30 minutes? That was amazing. Or, hey, I know that you really didn't want to leave the iPad and come to, swim lessons, but you did. And, that was really great. Good for you. Also, remember that these brains are firing on all cylinders all the time. And so it's really important that they also get downtime, right? They need that time to kind of just chill. So keep extracurricular activities to, I say essentials, but like really pare them down for your kids so that they're not at school all day and then coming home and going to soccer practice one day and swim lessons another day and, gymnastics another day and skating, right? That's too much. It's too much for their brains. It's asking too much for them to regulate themselves. They need to have downtime where they don't need to regulate themselves and their brains can just do what they're going to do. You want to set up, if your child does have homework, if they're of an age where that's homework is coming home, you want to provide them a quiet space that is simple and organized and clutter-free for them to be able to do that. You are going to have to be their executive functions, right? You're going to hear me say that for the rest of the night. Because their executive functions are delayed in developing, the adults in their lives have to be their external executive functions. So that means, yes, we have to teach them. We have to teach them with checklists. We have to teach them with calendars. We have to, set up a backpack organization thing for the morning. Like, what does that look like before you leave the house in the morning? Yes, providing a balanced diet can also be helpful. Establish healthy sleep hygiene. It is so important for these kids to get good sleep. And because of that, limit their screen time, especially at night, right? So that they have time to unwind and their bodies have time to slow down, because that can be really hard for some ADHD brains and bodies. And it makes falling asleep and staying asleep really difficult. So try and limit that screen time so that it's not impacting them at bedtime. So some things that you can teach them in terms of general strategies for organization and prioritizing. So, what things need to be done right now, what things need to be done soon, and what things need to happen later, right? And you want to provide some incremental, achievable goals, right? So the child can start to see their progress. How are they doing with getting these tasks done? And as you can see, you can do it with sticky notes. Like, you don't need to, go on Etsy and, spend hundreds of dollars on something that I'm sure is beautiful. But you don't need to do that. It can be as simple as, some sticky notes. And then for some kids, you're even going to need to break it down even more. So what are the list the steps that are involved before starting a task? Okay, so if you want to do this craft, what are these things that you're going to need to get? Do you need to put some sort of covering on the dining table? If you live at my house, the answer is yes. So that you're not getting paint and glitter all over the table. Or, what do you need to pull out of this cupboard or that cupboard and before you set up with a task, right? So you're really going to have to be their executive functions and giving them, instead of doing it for them, letting them know what needs to happen and modeling that for them. Organization, right? We have to help them develop strategies for their storage of work, their materials, their belongings. We have to really reinforce their work. The most important thing is that this system needs to be simple and sustainable. It can't be too, it can't be too much. So if having, color-coded binders, your kid is, they're like, well, I happen to know that, French is the purple binder, but like, I don't know where the purple binder is. Okay, well, that's not a sustainable solution then, having everything in separate color-coded binders, right? For this kid, that's not going to work. They're going to need something different. They're going to need everything all together, perhaps, right? So it can be a little trial and error. There is no one size fit all solution because not all brains are the same. Not all ADHD brains are the same. So everyone's going to be a little bit different. So you might have to try some things and realize, that wasn't super successful for this kiddo. I've got to try something a little bit differently. Try and make sure your home routines are as consistent and simple as possible, right? So if things are predictable, that is very helpful for the ADHD brain. You can do things like a schedule. So my daughter is 11 and I make her a monthly calendar. I'm nothing as detailed as this. And then on it, what I have are, I just put in little icons for, this is the day she has horseback riding. This is the day she has swimming. These are dates where she's going to a birthday party. And so she can look at that and she finds that incredibly helpful. The picture icon kind of jogs her memory that these are the things that are happening on those days. And it makes transitioning to those activities better. Not always foolproof, not always yay, but it's better than it was before we had that system. If your child needs even more things broken down, then you could do something as detailed as this, of what this looks like. Frankly, this looks awfully busy to me. Also, don't fret. There's an app for that. There are, so Timo and Goblin Tools are great at breaking down. So if you type in the task or your child types in the task, it will automatically, the AI in it automatically breaks it down into what the individual thinks. So if my daughter has to go clean her room, she can type in clean her room and it will automatically break that down for her. What does that look like? Because telling her to go clean her room is a super overwhelming task for her and she can't accomplish it if that's the only direction. Remember the Milk, Google Calendar, and Fantastical Calendar are also other apps that you can use that are calendar related. Try and simplify your space. Try and simplify your child's space, right? Reducing visual clutter, minimize the toys, limiting the child's choices, especially if your child feels like they're overwhelmed. And trying as much as possible to reduce the number of transitions during the day. And so that's another reason, to try and keep extracurricular activities to a minimum, right? So they're not, they're at school and there's transitions within the school day, but then they're transitioning home and then it's, they've got some downtime and are maybe watching some TV, but then they got to stop that and they got to come to dinner. And then after dinner, they got to get ready to go to swimming, right? That's too many transitions, right? It's overwhelming. So simplify things, simplify their life, simplify your life. Movement. All brains need movement. ADHD brains definitely need movement. So can they get some movement before they go to school? Can they do a high impact intensive training workout? I know that sounds crazy, but where there's lots of movement for 45 seconds and then they take a break and then they do lots of rapid movement again as much as they can in 45 seconds and then take a break. Can they do trampoline or running, wall push-ups? Can you make an obstacle course? If you're trying to wake up your child's nervous system in the morning before going to school, they can do some yoga. So you want to include a lot of opening extension poses because that wakes up the nervous system. Forward rolling and flexion poses calm the nervous system. So if you're trying to wake your child up before school, you want a lot of extension poses. If you need to calm them down before school, you want a lot of flexion poses. The self-awareness and self-talk. So again, we have to be providing this for them a lot because they're still living in a world that is telling them that they're wrong, that they're bad, that they don't quite fit in. They seem to think that they need to be doing everything perfectly. So we really have to be they're encouraging self-talk in the beginning so that they could start to internalize, hopefully, positive messages. So at first you don't succeed, it's okay, try again. We learn from our mistakes. Really try to guide your child through the steps of an activity or a math problem. We're going to start here, we're going to break this down. It doesn't have to be this big, scary whole piece. And as you and your child are going through some of these, strategies, whether it's organization or whatever, you can talk to this child about so what's working for you? Like when you're at school, if you're sitting at a 2-person table, do you find that you have a better, are you able to concentrate better than when you sit at a 4-person table? Or are you more successful if you sit at a table on your own? Or are you more distracted if you're sitting by the window and less distracted if you're sitting away from the window? Like you can talk to your kids about these things. They can do some morning mindfulness. How does that feel? Does that help you feel calm when we do morning mindfulness in the morning? Does that help your morning at all? Or when we do movement in the morning, does that help you? Right? Really talk to them and check in and have them sort of reflect, so that you guys are, tackling the solution collaboratively. The 6 to 12-year-olds certainly can be their own investigator. We can guide the child to recognize the signs in their body. I start to feel, my toes wiggle before I flop down on the floor. Or, I feel my fingers, burning before I yell or something like that. Really talk them through that so they can start to become really aware. Scaffolding for cognitive flexibility. We really, really, really have to help them embrace this idea of not yet. You're right, not yet. You can't do that yet, kiddo. But I have confidence you're going to be able to do it, right? Their executive functions are only delayed by 3 years. It's not that they're never going to have executive functions. So again, once they start to really understand their ADHD and understand themselves better, right, then they can really tap into those gifts of ADHD. So yeah, it might be tricky right now, kid, but you're going to get there. We're going to figure this out together. And, you are going to be on a path where you're going to feel more successful and you're going to feel like you understand yourself. We can always reframe challenging behaviors, right? Hyperactivity is vitality and impulsivity is spontaneity. Distractibility is, someone who's observing the larger world, right? And so we have to be mindful of how we are speaking about these children in front of them and around them and about them. And then they can start to internalize that cognitive flexibility if we are demonstrating cognitive flexibility too. How does ADHD work in a Montessori environment? Well, ADHD brains are really successful in high stimulation conditions. And guess what a Montessori classroom is? It's pretty high stimulation. Also in Montessori, we value order and routine. The Montessori guides are constantly engaging in self-reflective practice, and we hold ourselves accountable. If for no other reason, Montessori meets children where they are, right? Who is this kiddo in front of me? Where are they in their development? This is the child I have, so this is the child I'm going to work with. We also allow them to, explore the environment based on their own interests. So yeah, this is a child who has, an interest-based nervous system. So they do great in those environments where they're allowed to pursue their own interests. Hands-on learning is highly recommended for kids with ADHD, and Montessori is all about hands-on learning. We do use a strength-based approach to learning. And especially in the elementary environment, Montessori teachers work in collaboration with the child, right? Montessori guides are meeting with their elementary age students and checking in with them and having little, mini meetings about, how are things going? What are you finding difficult? How are you finding that work? Do you think that you've been producing your best work? Those kinds of things. So we're doing all of those things routinely. It's already embedded in the Montessori pedagogy. We have great activities for focusing on movement and attention. So we've got working memory games where, a child sets up an activity, even in the CASA. So they might have, some numerals out or some sandpaper letters out at a distance, and the teacher is sitting there and says, can you find 7? Go and find 7. And the child has to go and find it, right? So they've got to hold that piece of information in their mind, manipulate it, all the while having this, walk across the classroom. So they're getting their movement, they're working on their working memory. In the elementary program, there's interpretive reading cards. And we have this great thing called Practical Life, which is all about movement, and you need to stay focused. ADHD and social skills. We touched a little bit about this in the beginning. That ADHD can have some impacts in social relationships. So sometimes there's difficulty picking up on social cues. Sometimes there's trouble keeping friends. This is particularly true as a child ages, and particularly true if that ADHD is going untreated. ADHDers tend to go off topic when they're talking. And sometimes they can be a bit unreliable. Or they can have really big reactions and overreact. Right? And so those can all negatively impact peer relationships. So what can you do to help? So you can play role-playing games at home, right? With different social situations, and you're going to take turns playing the other part. So sometimes your kid gets to be, the other person. They don't always have to be the kid, who's making social mistakes. They get to be the other person. And then you can talk about what went well, what could have been done differently. So if your child is coming home and talking about a social situation that's happened at school or something, maybe not exactly in that moment because your child may be upset about it, but when they're a little calmer about it, you can say, hey, bud, should we try role playing that? Like what that could have looked like? How would you have liked it to go? What can we do differently from what happened today? They may benefit from signing up for a group sport or sort of group extracurricular activity rather than an individual activity, because it might be easier for them to kind of pick up on those social situations if they're part of a group instead of just one-on-one. You can also, record a conversation or watch a clip of a show that's a conversation and then talk about it. If your child is the kind of person who is constantly going off topic, record that conversation of them talking with their grandparent and going off topic all the time. And then again, only if they're open to it. Hey, did you hear how, grandpa asked you this question and you answered on this totally other different topic here? Discuss how that conversation could have gone differently. Again, you're using your organizational tools and your checklists, right? So that they are feeling like they know what they need to bring. They're not going to be unreliable because, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to be bringing, the fruits and snacks for this week's game, helping them to stay on task with those things. You can also teach them mindfulness, right? So that they start to notice early signs of irritation, anger, overwhelm, and then practice and teach them grounding techniques. All of those things need to be taught and practiced a lot when your child does not need them in order for them to be able to start to utilize them at times when they do need them. Okay. I am coming in under an hour. I'm so proud of myself. Okay, let's recap. ADHD is neurobiological in origin. It is not, in fact, a deficit of attention. It's really a deficit of focus, right? The ADHD brain is actually really struggling with filtering out all the input, the unnecessary input, and that's why they're losing focus all the time. So really the name of it is a bit of a, it's a bit wrong, if we can say it that way, because it's a deficit of focus. It's a deficit of being able to focus on what you need to focus on. It does cause delays in the development of executive function by roughly about 3 years. And ADHDers have an interest-based nervous system, so we have to keep it novel, keep it interesting. In case you didn't know, there are some well-known people who have ADHD, including Simone Biles and Channing Tatum, Michael Phelps, will.i.am, the 4-time Oscar-winning film director Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu, Lisa Ling, Emma Watson, Solange Knowles, Bill Gates, Richard Branson, Howie Mandel, Selma Hayek, Ty Pennington, Jamie Oliver, and Justin Timberlake. I would argue that probably 90-95% of all entrepreneurs also have ADHD, whether they know it or not. So if you can remember one thing, it's that this is an interest-based nervous system. So if you can capture their interest, you don't need to worry about their attention span. Thank you very much. And I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Melanie. I have so much that I would love to just chat about, but I'm not going to, because I'm sure people have questions. I don't think our chat function is working. And so you may just have to unmute yourself and jump in. And does somebody want to start? I do have a few questions in the background if you need me to get it going. Okay. Oh, was that a hand? No. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you. When you spoke about girls in particular, I was one of those girls. As a little girl, my father, I talk about it in the workshops that I do now, and he actually said that they spent the first 2 years trying to get me to walk and talk, and the next 16 trying to get me to stop. And my diagnosis back then was that I took after, I was just like a great aunt, and I never knew what it meant. I just knew that at school, I learned so differently to my friends who just seemed to take in things easily. And you said it, exactly that. I was an adult getting my middle son diagnosed when I said to the doctor, I feel like we're talking about me. And that was when I had my formal testing. So everything you said, it was just so lovely and refreshing to hear somebody confirm, I guess, who you are, and and the strategies and things that I have put in place to support myself, and everything that I did to support my son, sort of unknowingly at first. Thank you very much. It was really interesting.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Hey, Gwen. Oh, you're still muted. Just a second.
Sorry, I had to figure out where the unmute was. I was hiding. I've been, obviously, Melanie, I've wanted to see this presentation for a while, but sorry. I think my only comment, so my oldest son has ADHD and autism, and that's how we've ended up here. And I had an ADHD diagnosis for a really long time, but when he got his autism diagnosis, that's when I got mine too. So I think my only comment I think about your presentation is, because there is so much overlap between ADHD and autism, I think some of the things you said, like putting kids in a team sport, is like could be a great suggestion, but I also just kind of wanted to put it out there that like sometimes doing an individual sport in a team environment could like also be a really good fit because you don't have to like have the same expectations of social skills, but you still get to be like part of a team.
Yep.
Yeah, so I just felt like I don't know, that was just kind of like a hey, because we have like my son in tumbling, so he gets to like do his own thing, but like with another like groups of people, and like that's really good for his social skills. Yeah, and also just with the executive. Oh, and the other cool thing is, I know you mentioned in the morning, like sometimes the kids need to get all their energy out, but another good thing is that we do like heavy work, so actually like pushing heavy things will like wake his
Mhm.
system up. Um, and sometimes, like if you suspect you have ADHD, you can go to an occupational therapist and get like a sensory assessment done, and they can give you like so many good suggestions for that. So
Yes, that is excellent advice. Thanks, Gwen. And it's
yeah.
nice.
Yeah, you too. Sorry, she's my neighbor. But yeah, I don't know how to mute myself. Okay, hold on. Here we go. I got it.
No, you're good. Thanks, Gwen. I'll throw out sort of an education question, Melanie. I'd love to hear what you think about this. So a question that was sent to me was, um, I'm going to rephrase it, but how does a child with ADHD sort of experience those sensitive periods for learning? So we talk about that in Montessori, that children sort of go through these sensitive periods for learning, where it's sort of the like the golden hour opportunity, right? Where things can come more easily or more smoothly. And just curious about how ADHD might affect those periods, if you've got an opinion or thoughts about that.
There doesn't seem to be any indication that an ADHD child will experience the sensitive periods differently than a neurotypical child. Like they go through, so the sensitive periods being like language, and I can't even remember what the rest of them are now. Don't tell my trainers.
Your secret is safe.
Yeah. But again, like it's, I think they still experience all of those. It just might be that their sensitive period for some things might be, longer. If that's what their nervous system is more interested in, right? And so some might be shorter, right? But we never really know that even with a neurotypical child, right? We don't know usually, like, we sort of know roughly when sensitive periods are supposed to happen, but we don't really know. It's not like they come in announcing like, oh, I'm in my sensitive period right now. So I haven't seen any, certainly in the work that I do with kids, I haven't seen anything that indicates to me that they are either not experiencing them or having any negative impacts. Again, if they are having some sort of sensory issues, sort of as Gwen mentioned, that's always a flag to me that, we should get a sensory profile from an occupational therapist to help them with those needs. Because sensory needs are like oxygen, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess I was sort of thinking, I could see how, sometimes some of the behaviors could interrupt, right? Or look like they're interrupting. They certainly can interrupt access to learning.
Yes.
Right? Just because the opportunity you have to introduce a child to something is briefer. Like you've got a tiny window, you're going to move fast, you're going for novelty, but it's almost like the adult has to be more patient rather than, and be open to repetition, I think, a little bit more frequently. And maybe, like, I'm not even sure of that. Like, I think that's a maybe too.
Yeah. And
rather than do they not have these opportunities, right? Like sort of
Yeah.
neurobiologically.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's really up to the adults to tailor the instruction to the child. So maybe a presentation that is, kind of medium length, and typically you could get through it with a child. Well, maybe this needs to be chunked. Maybe it's 3 presentations, right? Because that's all they've got the attention span for, but they're still ready for it. They're still able to absorb it all.
Right.
They just need it chunked.
Yeah. Yeah. Similar to, helping out at home. If the child's task is to set the table, being able to say, take the forks,
Yeah.
then come back, take the plate, now come back, if that really resonates with me. You can't just say, like, your job is to set the table. That means nothing, and like, they'll go and look at the table.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they're off to their room because they're not coming back to you. Like,
no, because that was huge and overwhelming, right?
Yeah. But so really being able to chunk it into those small things one at a time.
Yeah. And that's why I was excited when I discovered some of those apps, again, because my daughter's a little bit older.
Yeah.
Because I also don't want the mental load of writing out a checklist of what is involved in cleaning your room. I would just like you to clean your room.
And more than once. Not
exactly.
A list that they will put in their little pocket and pull out next time.
Yeah. So I thought that was great. And, and then I remember she came to me once and she's like, it says I have to vacuum. Do I need to vacuum? And I was like, you could, but if you want to, yes. But I'm going to say that if that's the last thing on that list, first of all, if we can see your floor already, that is golden. Like, yeah. So I liked being able to discover those two, just because I was like, I also don't need the mental load of always being the person who's breaking down the task.
Absolutely. I think that's a little bit about what's most striking about that sort of 3-year lag, or potential 3-year lag, right? Is I think we all forget how long it's taken us to learn things that come really naturally to us now, like, different steps, and then realizing, you're in for a little bit of a longer time of that effortful guidance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Because Melanie and I can talk forever, but I won't keep her on the screen for that.
I think there was a question about the least expensive way to get an assessment or diagnosis. So I think technically your doctor, either your family doctor, can administer what's known as the Conners assessment. So they would ask, because ADHD has to show up in 2 settings, they would send it also to school if that's the other setting where you're seeing it in, or they can make a referral to someone who can do that. That is covered by OHIP, or mostly covered by OHIP. That being said, the forms that are used are like a really like quick and dirty, questionnaire. And it's sort of like, forgets to complete task, never, often, always kind of thing. Right. And so, yes, that can be handy. But I also think that those kinds of questionnaires, like, there's a lot of nuance that isn't, that it misses. And it's certainly not a complete, it's not a complete profile of your child's brain. So unfortunately, it really is the big $4,000 assessment that will give you the sort of, I like them because they're a complete, what is this child's what is the brain's strengths and what are the brain's challenges, right? And they should give us a really great picture of what that is. But they are not cheap. So to answer what is the cheapest is, I think you can get a referral from your family doctor for something that is at least partially covered by OHIP. But it'll really just either say ADHD or not. Anyone else?
I don't think so. I think I'm going to call it.
All right. Wow.
Thank you so much, Melanie. It's such a treat. It's like,
Oh
really,
my gosh, thank you.
it's so great.
So much for having me. It has been
Yeah.
great for me as well.
So we will be in touch. Thank you, everybody, for showing up tonight, and hope to see you again. I can't remember when our next parent online event is, but maybe January, maybe December. No way to know. But you can check our calendar, and we will see you all soon. Thank you. Oh, I love people are clapping with their little